Welcome to The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, a production of LibertyNation.com, hosted by Mark Angelides.
Each night when I go to sleep, I die, and the next morning when I wake, I'm reborn. So said Mahatma Gandhi. It's the body's repair system, nature's best shot at immortality, and the panacea of the tormented. Yet sleep is even more than this. The slumbering hours have been one of the driving forces of history and historical narrative, shaping the beings who shaped the world. How leaders sleep, or more precisely, how many hours they sleep, provides an interesting insight into their achievements and legacies. The health organizations recommend that for someone between the ages of 18 and 60, 7 to 8 hours of shut-eye is optimal. But let's examine what some of recent history's more prominent figures managed to scrape by on. Winston Churchill famously slept for only 4 or 5 hours a night. Granted, he was well known for having the occasional midday nap, as did JFK and Ronald Reagan. But with a lifestyle wrapped in cigars and booze, he still maintained a highly functioning and vigorous outward persona. Sticking with British Prime Ministers for a moment, Margaret Thatcher, the Iron Lady, was also known to get just 4 hours of sleep a night. She would insist that her ministers and advisors remain on call until 3 a.m. When John Major became PM, taking over, he struggled to manage the workload because by that time the cabinet officials were used to the grueling hours set by Thatcher. And what of American leaders? President Trump skirted by on a mere 4 hours a night, often making calls or sending tweets at unsociable hours. Abraham Lincoln was a well-known insomniac who couldn't actually even sleep in the Lincoln bed. It's thought that Barack Obama was a 5-hour night man. What do these leaders have in common? Legacies of efficiency. It may perhaps prove telling that President Joe Biden gets plenty of sleep. Numerous sources suggest that he's all but incommunicado from 7 p.m. in the evening until 9 a.m. the next morning. During his campaign, he became notorious for calling lid days from noon onwards. But what of sleep deprivation and sleep deficits? It's believed that the second of Sir Isaac Newton's breakdowns, and the one that caused him to leave science full-time, was caused by his lack of regular sleeping habits. And Thomas Edison, who once said, "Sleep is a criminal waste of time inherited from our cave days." Although he was famed for his heavy workload and ability to get things done, he'd need to take the occasional day to catch up on the lack of sleep that his whirlwind work had stolen from him. Here's the rub. It seems that less sleep gives people the opportunity to achieve great things, but there's often a heavy cost to pay. The original Hippocratic Oath began with the words, quote, "I swear by Apollo the physician, and by Asclepius, and by Hygeia, and Panacea, and by all the gods as well as goddesses, making them judges to bring the following oath to fulfillment, in accordance with my power and judgment." End quote. The Asclepius mentioned in this oath, or more rightly this prayer, is a mythical figure from Greek legend who was thought to be the son of Apollo and a mortal woman. The story goes that Apollo impregnated Coronis, who was then murdered by Artemis for being unfaithful to Apollo. The unborn child was cut from the womb and raised by the Olympian in the ways of medicine. There are other origin stories regarding Asclepius, but ultimately they all end with him learning the ways of healing from Apollo. But why is Asclepius relevant to sleep? Well, as he grew older, he became a great healer, even surpassing the skills of other notable gods. A cult grew up around him that continued for many years after he became classified as a full deity. The worshippers, they created temples of healing known as Asclepions, or dream temples. Those who were sick would attend and be invited to sleep for the night. They would then tell the priests of their dreams, who would, based on the dreams, recommend various methods of curing their ills. It's suspected that rather than just normal sleep, the sick would be given a wine mixed with substances that could produce vivid dreams or hallucinations. There was also a type of non-venomous snake that would, in great numbers, be free to slither around the temples, and they were often used in certain healing rituals. And it's from this snake symbology and from Asclepius' legend as a healer that we now have the modern symbol for medicine found on pharmacies, hospitals, and ambulances all over the world. The two snakes entwining the rod of Asclepius. It's at a famous Asclepion on the Isle of Cos, built around the 3rd century BC, that it's thought the father of modern medicine, Hippocrates, first learned his trade. But what of literature? Now, sleep has played a major role not just in inspiring the passions that come with dreams, nor the dedicated works required to produce a tome that lasts, but the act of sleep also has a narrative driver in some of our oldest tales. The Epic of Gilgamesh, probably history's oldest written story, shows us that sleep, or rather the lack of it, was seen as a source of pride many thousands of years ago. When Gilgamesh is trying to find his own path to immortality, Utnapishtim, the Noah-like character, describes how he himself was rewarded with eternal life. He then tells Gilgamesh that to achieve his own immortality, he must first start with a task. He has to stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. Then, surely, the gods would convene and grant him his wish. Needless to say, Gilgamesh promptly falls asleep, as it seems Utnapishtim suspected. In fact, our hero, Gilgamesh, he manages to stay asleep for almost the entire period he was supposed to remain awake, only to discover that each day a loaf of bread had been brought into him while he was slumbering. Was Gilgamesh supposed to fail at this? Even many years ago, was the idea that man could escape the desperate pull of sleep thought to be both impossible and unappealing? In 1959, a radio DJ, Peter Tripp, embarked on a charity stunt that to this day remains famous. As part of a money-raising event for the March of Dimes, he pledged to broadcast his show from a booth in Times Square for 200 hours without sleep. As he was planning on taking stimulants for the show, medical researchers were brought in to monitor him. And now, he managed to keep things together well on air, but it was off air that he really began to crumble. From thinking that the government was after him to wild hallucinations, Tripp eventually began to believe that he was not, in fact, Peter Tripp. He managed to stay awake for 201 hours. At least 2 other people have since broken this record. But after the event, he slept for a straight 24 hours and claimed no permanent side effects from the challenge. Few human necessities have captured history and legend more than sleep. It's our sweet release, our refuge. And as Gandhi said, it's upon waking that we're reborn, renewed, and refreshed. Perhaps we should be looking at our culture and society as a living being. Maybe they've become too awake or too woke, if you will. And what's needed is to make them healthy once more through the healing powers of sleep. Thank you for listening to The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, a production of LibertyNation.com.
Go deeper on the topic discussed in this video, head on over to one of these links here or go to our Liberty Nation Roku channel. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for Liberty.
The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, a LibertyNation.com production. Available at Libsyn, Apple iTunes, Stitcher, on Roku, and other fine podcast providers.